Hello, gentlemen, barbarians, savages. Rooster here. We'll talk to you a little bit today about limiting government, how to limit government, what I think some of the problems are in government. I already talked a little bit about controlling monopolies and the corporate realm. So, being a good libertarian, I'm going to talk about controlling the biggest monopoly that we have, and that's our government. Problems that we have in government usually fall into four categories. Head count, that's the number of people that we have employed by the government. Spending, our budgeting, and our entitlements and our military. So let's start with the first one, head count. You look at the head count, and initially when I started researching this a couple days ago, I dug in, I found, 2%. And the economists say it should be around 10% of the population should be employed by the government. 2%, oh, that's not bad. But then I realized that's just federal. You look at state, county, and city, and federal, and it turns out to be about 7.38% of the population. Well, then you say to yourself, well, that's still not that bad. But then you don't take into account that you have kids, babies, high schoolers who are generally not employed by the government. Then you got the old, the sick, the incarcerated, expats that live in other countries that are still citizens here on the census. All of those categories that I just described to you, none of them work. They're part of the population, but they don't, they're not employed. So what you really need to look at is the number of people employed by the government as a percentage of the workforce, not the population, the workforce. Well, that gave me another surprising number. Out of 350 million people in the United States, did you know that only about 125 million of us work, have jobs? That's part-time and full-time. So now that 7.38% of the population works out to about 25 million people employed by the governments of all four levels: federal, state, county, city. Well, 25 million out of 125 million is 20%. Now you look at what the economists say should be 10%. It's double. It's twice the size of what it should be. Now, when you look at these employees at the local level, starting at the lowest level, you have fire, you have police, you have your library workers, you have highway workers, stuff like that. The vast majority of the workers at the state, local, and city level fall into three categories. The biggest is teachers. K through 12 education is huge. It's over 6.5 million people. Second biggest is professors, colleges, higher education. That's 2 million. And then you got about 1 million people that work for the corrections or the jails, the prisons. So that's what we're paying for at the local level. We're paying for kids to go to school. We're paying for professors and for higher education. And we're paying for people that are sitting in jail and prison guards to watch them. That tells you a lot about our society right there. But the solution for that, and I'm going to do these problem, solution, because there's four of them. It's easier than doing all the problems and then summarizing and then doing all the solutions. So I'm going to do problem, solution. So the head count solution is taken right from the military. It's interesting that the government created a federal law for the military, but it won't create a federal law for itself. In the military, and I was in the military, I was in the Navy for 21 years and 4 months. So I know a little bit about the billet system and controlling the billets and controlling headcount. And in the military, there's a federal law that says only 2.5% of the military can be the highest rank. That's E8 and E9 for enlisted people. So they already have this set in the military, and the government made a federal law that said that 2.5% can be the 2 highest ranks. And only 1% of the military can be the highest rank, which is E9. And what does that do? That conglomerates experience at the top, but not numbers at the top. So someone pops off and retires, another E7 gets to come in and get promoted. Another one pops off the top, another one comes in. But it keeps that experience and wisdom at the top, but it doesn't make the company top heavy so it topples over. Anybody who's been in the military knows that, you know, after E7, you do a lot of carrying your coffee around. You know, your fingers get kind of used to that shape because that's all you're doing. You're just supervising and doing paperwork. The vast majority of the work is done by the groups of people that are E1 to E6. And that's the way it should be, you know, in any hierarchical situation. So what do we need to do? Exactly what the military is forced to do by the government. The government needs to make a law that forces civil servants to be only 10% of the workforce. And that's going to cut a lot of salaries out, and it's going to get a lot of people. It's going to move a lot of people out into the private sector. But we have a grossly obese governmental system as far as the number of workers. We have twice as many as we need to have a lean, efficient government. 20% of the workforce should not be employed by the government. So that's the first thing. Now let's talk about spending. A lot of people complain about spending. You'll hear about spending on Fox News and how, oh my goodness, we have to pay for food stamps and welfare and all these welfare mothers and how it's just terrible, and I just don't believe how much money we have to spend. Okay? The current economic way that they track spending is as a percentage of GDP. Right now, the United States spends 34 to 38% of the GDP on the government. Yeah, more than a third of the money, of the entire money that we make every year, gets spent on the government. 34% of GDP. That's a huge amount of money. But where does it all go? Well, I'll make it real simple for you. We spend discretionary and non-discretionary spending. Okay? In non-discretionary spending, which is stuff that we have to pay. Every year we have to pay. It's like a bill that comes in the mail. We got to pay it. Social Security is the highest. That's old people. The next thing is Medicaid, Medicare. That's sick people. The next thing is entitlements, but not the entitlements that you think, but entitlements under other. And you would think that that's poor people, but I'm going to show you that it's actually not. And then, over on the other side, we have discretionary spending, which is money we can spend. We can change it up every year. And by far, the hugest discretionary spending that we have is the military. We spend over 30% of our budget on the military. We have the largest military in the world. We're larger than the next 16 countries, militaries all added together. We're still bigger than their military. Our military is huge. We have 1.3 million people in the Air Force, Navy, Army, Marines, Coast Guard, and we have another 800,000 reservists. It's huge. But let's go back and of course, the reason that's so big, and let's just talk about it since we're talking about the military. We'll talk about the discretionary spending because it's real easy. What we need to do to reduce that spending and make the military smaller. And I believe that we do that, even though I get a retirement check from the military. I do believe we need to make it smaller, a lot smaller, like half. Because the next war is going to be drones. The next war is going to be limited nuclear war, and small group warfare and special weapons and tactics groups. It's not going to be an army over here and an army here over here running at each other with bayonets. It's just not going to happen. So, we don't need this. And we have one of the biggest things that we have that no other country has. There's 186 bases, American bases, in other countries. Why are we in Germany? Why are we in Korea? Why are we in Japan? Why are we in the Philippines? Why do we have a base in Guam? It's this power projection that we have to have in policing the rest of the world. That's not what the military was originally for. The military was to protect the United States and our borders. Okay? So shut those bases down. Bring them back to Fort Bragg. Bring them back to Connecticut. Bring them back to the submarine bases in San Francisco and San Diego. Bring them back onto our shores. And, then figure out what your billet structure is, and it's going to be half, and you'll be able to send more ships out to sea and have more flyovers and have more sorties and stuff like that from the United States. But we don't need to be projecting power into the Malaysian peninsula. There's no reason for it. Let China and Russia do their thing over there and control their sector of the world, and we'll control ours and protect our own borders. So that's my take on the discretionary. Now the non-discretionary, I said Social Security and Medicare are the two biggest ones, and then the next one down is other, and it's under entitlements. But if you look into the entitlements, you think it's going to be food stamps and welfare and unemployment, all that stuff. Let me tell you, all of food stamps for the entire United States, every single person on food stamps, $36 billion out of $3 trillion. Okay? All of unemployment is $100 billion. Okay? This other section is corporate welfare. I don't know, a lot of you know that corporations can write off CEO benefits. They can pay CEOs as much as they want, billions and billions, $100 billion. They write it off at the end of the year. Okay? That's one way of corporate welfare, is tax write-offs, and the other way is subsidies. Big agriculture gets $500 billion in subsidies every year. Big pharma, $711 billion, $711 billion, $711 trillion, one check written to big pharma, to one company, or $36 billion written every 2 weeks, unemployment check or food stamp checks to every single person in the United States. What's a bigger drain? Okay, so you got big agro, you got big pharma, and then you got the oil industry. They get huge subsidiaries, almost $500 billion. Again, $36 billion compared to $500 billion. Standard oil, any of the fossil fuels for exploration and stuff like that. They just get a check written to them by the government for that. It's a huge disparity. And, Merck, any of the big pill companies and stuff like that, Bayer, they all get these subsidiaries every year into the trillions of dollars. Just tax write-offs that they don't have to write, and then actual money that they get from the government. General Electric has bragged that they haven't paid any tax, zero tax in the last 10 years, because the subsidiaries and the payments offset any tax that they would have had to pay. So when you hear people talk about on Fox News about entitlements and lowering entitlements, you should raise your hand and say, yeah, let's lower entitlements. Let's lower corporate welfare to zero. There's no reason that we should be paying a company that's been in business for 100 years all of this money. And I didn't even include Goldman Sachs and the financial districts, Chase and Morgan Stanley. They get subsidies. And what do? They just transfer money from one to the other. They just take care of pension funds and stuff like that. They're not actually doing anything. They're just managing money. What the hell do they need a subsidy for? $500 billion to Goldman Sachs? $500 billion is all of the unemployment and food stamps in the United States to all the poor people in the United States 5 times over. So when you get unemployed and you think about it, instead of getting $600 every 2 weeks for unemployment, you could actually get 5 times that. What's 5 times 6? $3,000. You could get $3,000 every 2 weeks. That's $60,000 a year in unemployment. For 40 weeks or whatever. You can live on that. I don't care who you are. You can live on that. Just from one company's corporate welfare check. One company's corporate welfare check. You could increase unemployment payments to $3,000. Now, do you need to? No, you want to motivate people to get their job back, but still, $600 every 2 weeks is really hard to live on. If you made it $1,500 or even $1,800, I mean, you'd still motivate people to get off unemployment, but still have enough money to live on. So that's a thing. Okay, that's spending. Oh, I didn't even talk about the debt. Yeah, you also have the debt. What of that 34 to 38% that we spend on GDP? Here's a big deal: 10% of that is national debt, and 6% of that is the interest on national debt. So that brings me right in to my third thing that I want to talk about, which is the budget. I already said where all the money goes to, right? But we need a balanced budget amendment that gets rid of our national debt. The interest on our national debt, $223 billion, okay? You could take pollution control, food stamps, unemployment, and what am I at? I'm at about 170. Probably education, and have that all for free. College education, pollution control, free food stamps for everybody that's on it right now, and free unemployment, paid for by just having zero national debt and having no interest on that debt. No interest on the credit card. The credit card right now is so big that we could actually pay for those 4 programs just by the interest. That's just the interest on the debt. So that's something to think about. We need to get rid of it. But how do we get rid of it? Of course, limitations. We have to put them on the government. Israel does this. Israel made a balanced budget amendment, and they said, guess what? If you don't balance the budget, Congress, the executive branch, and the Senate, nobody gets paid. Nobody gets paid till the budget's balanced. And guess what? Since they made that law, do you know how many unbalanced budgets that Israel's had? You can count them. Exactly 0. It gets done. Okay? Do you know the last time we had a balanced budget? I think Clinton had a surplus 16 years ago. And it's not even the problem with balancing the budget. It's getting people to do the budget and sign off on the budget. Sometimes it takes 2 or 3 years just to get a budget signed off on, and they're already past it. Okay, so what we need to do, the solution to the budget, is balanced budget amendment. Force their hand. You don't provide us with a balanced budget, you don't get paid. Okay? So, those are my 3 ideas. Limit headcount to 10% of the workforce. Limit spending to 10% GDP. Right? It's 34 to 38% of GDP right now. We need to reduce it down to 10%. And how do we do that? We're going to have to cut back on the military, and we're going to have to cut back on corporate welfare. And just those 2 things alone will get us down around 11-12%, because we can pay everything else off. And the third thing is balanced budget amendment. Have to have a balanced budget every single year, no doubt about it. So that's all I got. As always, feel free to comment in the comment section if you disagree with me. If you have other ideas that you want to put down, please feel free to write them down there. I love dissent. And that's all I have today. So as always, take it easy.